Welcome to the Medical Independent Innovation in Healthcare podcast series, where we explore the advances that are transforming Irish healthcare and the innovative minds behind them. From cutting-edge technologies to groundbreaking research to new models of care, Ireland is at the forefront of medical innovation. Our guests are leading figures in the Irish and international healthcare community who are revolutionising the way patients are being treated. So whether you're a healthcare professional, a patient, or simply curious about the latest developments in Irish medicine, join us for an engaging and informative discussion.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Medical Independent Innovation in Healthcare podcast series. I'm your host, Priscilla Lynch, Clinical Editor of the Medical Independent. Joining me in this episode is Professor William Gallagher, co-lead of the All-Ireland Cancer Research Institute and Professor of Cancer Biology in the UCD School of Biomedical Science, and Professor Mark Lawler, Associate Professor of Digital Health at the Faculty of Medicine, Queen's University Belfast, and co-lead of the All-Ireland Cancer Research Institute. Thank you both for joining me in this special episode. We're going to be talking about the development of the All-Ireland Cancer Research Institute and about how you both became involved with the initiative. So first of all, I'm going to ask both of you, why in particular did you choose oncology as your specialist area?
So first of all, Priscilla, thanks very much for the opportunity to chat. So my start in cancer research actually came through Joe Duffy. Now, not the famous radio disc jockey Joe Duffy, but an actual hard-working biochemist working in St. Vincent's Hospital. And he was essentially doing research. Obviously, he had a full-time job as a biochemist in the hospital, but he did research off his own back. And he probably was one of the most well-published cancer researchers, breast cancer researchers in Ireland. And I suppose I had an opportunity when I was a science student in UCD, and during third year I had an opportunity to do like an undergraduate project in Vincent's with him. And that really kickstarted my whole interest in cancer research. That's over 30 years ago. And I've kind of kept that interest in cancer research since then. So that was I was bitten by the bug by that experience as an undergraduate.
And how about yourself, Professor Lawler?
Yeah, Priscilla, just like Liam said, also influenced by a number of mentors. And first of all, Peter Humphreys, who was a geneticist. And I started my undergraduate project with him. And he had just come to Trinity College Dublin, where I was then, ironically from Queen's, which is where I am now. And I was just lucky that it was the right time in relation to he just arrived. I was interested in cancer. He'd done a lot of work in cancer at that time. So it was a natural decision to first do a research project with him and then start my PhD. I was then lucky that he then met with a professor of hematology called Sean McCann. And so that sort of started my interest in, at that time, leukemia, although I don't work in that area anymore, but that was sort of the start. And then I suppose the other mentor that really sort of has influenced my life in science was Paddy Johnson. And that's the reason I'm here in Belfast, and we may cover that slightly later on in the podcast, but he was my sort of third mentor, if you like, and he persuaded me to come to Queen's in Belfast initially as a visiting professor, and then subsequently I got a job here and I've been here for the last 11 years.
Both of you have an array of titles which showcase your long-established careers in research in oncology. But from talking to both of you previously, it's all about putting that research to work for the benefit of patients. And this project that you're both involved with, the All-Ireland Cancer Research Institute, it's a really interesting initiative, a North and South initiative, something that's very unique, very special. And Mark, you were really involved with this institute long before even it was in its current format. So can perhaps you tell me a bit about the history of how it came about and how it's developed into what it is today?
No, absolutely. So this all started 25 years ago with the development of the Northern Ireland US National Cancer Institute Cancer Consortium. So actually up in Stormont, there was a memorandum of understanding signed by the two ministers for health at the time and the director of human health services in the US. And that really started an initiative that has grown and flourished over that period of time. It's allowed, for example, cancer clinical trials, 35,000 patients to be on cancer clinical trials on the island of Ireland. It's allowed us to enhance research between Ireland and Northern Ireland and the NCI, a 550% increase in joint publications, but not only the sort of number of publications, but also the quality has greatly increased. So it was really a great initiative, and that initiative was inspired by my third mentor, as I said, Paddy Johnson, because he had been at the National Cancer Institute in Washington and saw the opportunity when he came back to Belfast to really set up a unique partnership. And that partnership has just grown over that 25-year period, and we're celebrating that partnership this year, which has been great with a number of different events, including a recent forum that we had in Farmley. So it's been really a journey, if you like, but a really positive journey for patients on the island of Ireland.
And obviously that US input is crucial as well to the success and to development and the uniqueness of this particular initiative. And that's something that hasn't faded away into the background. It's stayed there. And what we're going to discuss later in the podcast is going to showcase that. So, Professor Gallagher, can you tell me as well about your involvement in the project and shaping it?
Yeah, so even early on in my career, I saw what was going on in terms of, I'm slightly more junior than Mark, not too much. I had seen what was going on there in terms of that partnership, that tripartite partnership between Ireland, Northern Ireland, US, NCI. And I suppose what I was critically interested in, what was happening on the island of Ireland in terms of encouraging people to come together, for common interest to combat cancer. And I suppose I'd been involved in leading or co-leading various different large-scale cancer research programs. So one particular program which I had the pleasure of leading was called Breast Predict. So where we assembled all of the breast cancer researchers, now in this case in Ireland, not in Northern Ireland per se, across the country, where we had surgeons, oncologists, people working in the labs, mathematical scientists, all working together towards a common purpose. This was funded exclusively by the Irish Cancer Society for a 6-year period. And it was great. We had a lot of great work, for example, big impact in terms of not just publications, but also at a clinical level in terms of new clinical trials. But what was frustrating to me was the stop-start nature in terms of projects. Like cancer doesn't think in a 3 to 5 year cycle. So ultimately, when we're trying to tackle cancer, we need to have a long-term perspective. And I suppose a trigger for that happened I think it was around 2018. I had a conversation. I was involved in a patient voice in cancer research event driven by my good colleague, Professor Amanda McCann, where we're encouraging researchers to interact with patient partners. And I was sitting beside someone who was a chap called Kieran Briscoe, who was involved in Family Carers Ireland, who had family members affected by cancer. And I suppose I was telling him what I wanted to do in terms of this broader picture in terms of cancer research on the entire island. And he had the expertise, I guess, in terms of that political engagement piece, which was critically important. And we kind of thought about what was our strategy in terms of going forward. And then in conversation, we brought Mark in to really look at how do we do it, really provide a kind of vision for integration of cancer research across the entire island. And then in 2020, we actually got nominated representatives for 10 academic institutions across the entire island, but also importantly, other stakeholders from, say, for example, National Cancer Control Programme, different cancer charities, industry representatives, patient partners, other clinical trials groups. So it was important not just that we stay within our ivory towers of the academic arena, but also broaden it. And I suppose what we did then is it's a kind of like a grassroots effort where we asked for ideas from the community. We asked people, what were you interested in? What do you want to do? And we got a huge amount of really exciting ideas. And I suppose our effort was to try to channel some of those ideas towards specific projects. And what was great, just soon after we did that, an opportunity came under essentially what's called the Shared Island Unit. This was an initiative driven by the Department of An Taoiseach for funding, not just for, this was a particular pot of money for research, but it's a more broader perspective of initiatives to integrate what's happening in terms of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And we essentially bid very strategically for that programme, and we were delighted to be very successful. This was all aspects of science, all aspects of humanities, and we essentially got 1/3 of the funding under that programme for North-South cancer research projects. And so one project that myself and Mark lead, it's like a demonstrator project where we have 10 PhD students, 10 postdoctoral fellows across the 10 academic institutions, but working together, cross-institutionally in the area of precision cancer medicine. And then we have 2 other projects. One, again, Mark is involved with, and he'll probably talk about it later, the area of data, the area of e-health and digital health. And another project which is led by Professor Lorraine O'Driscoll in Trinity and Paul Mullen in Queen's, in a very exciting area of liquid biopsies. Can we find this magic kind of needle in the haystack in blood, which is an indicator of cancer? So I suppose what we've done now is, we have this groundswell of kind of interest. We've been quite successful in terms of putting some of the community together, but now we want to bring it to that next stage. That's really critically important for us to really go to that final stage of, I suppose, developing an all-island virtual cancer institute that really maximizes opportunities for patients, but also the broader research community.
Absolutely. And cancer knows no boundaries, as we know, and Ireland is a small island. So really pooling resources clinically and, across research institutions obviously has many benefits, as you've mentioned there. And there's different things we can learn from each other as well. I'm sure, Mark, you certainly do some things better in Northern Ireland and perhaps vice versa.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, that sort of complementarity and each of us bringing something to the table is really important. I mean, Northern Ireland is probably better in relation to cancer biobanking, for example, and some of the data aspects. Republic of Ireland probably better in relation to aspects of precision oncology. There's a precision oncology initiative that's been running for a number of years, led out of UCD. So I think it's really complementary, and it's the sum of the parts. And again, sort of going back to what you said there earlier yourself, not only do we know no borders, but also we don't compete against each other. We compete against our common enemy, which is cancer. But it's been a great journey, and it's been brilliant to have a colleague such as Liam. So as he said earlier, we're sometimes known as the Chuckle Brothers when we get up on stage to talk about the initiative. But it's been a great partnership, and that's really the key thing, because personality does influence if you can work together, it makes it a lot easier to drive programs like these. And it's been a very exciting journey as well, which has been great.
Yeah, and I think a key part of it is, well, myself and Mark are probably identified as kind of, I suppose, some of the drivers or key drivers behind the initiative. It's what people make of it. So we have a co-leadership structure, so people can take different elements out of it, and we see other groups kind of driving forward different initiatives, and we try to support that. And it's an inclusive initiative, and that's key for me. That certainly it's probably easy to criticize things that you're doing, but then if you're involved in making it, then it's harder to criticize it. So that inclusivity piece is critically important, and that buy-in from the broader community, but also the close engagement in terms of, like, we have very strong support from the National Cancer Control Programme. Rita Olida, who's the director, is a really strong advocate of this programme, because if you look at the National Cancer Strategy in Ireland, for example, there's a call for an overarching framework for cancer research. It's in the strategy, but we don't actually have that. We don't have a written down plan of what we're supposed to do in cancer research, from fundamental discovery all the way to clinical trials. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have good activity. We just don't have a written down kind of a plan. And that's part of what we're trying to do with AICRI, is define what we're good at and what's the opportunity areas and how we can actually work effectively together.
I suppose one thing that really researchers have to agree on is every country can't be good at everything, and cancer is such a broad disease. Is there particular areas that you're interested in honing in and that you think that Irish researchers can bring particular benefits to?
I think the data space is one where we feel that there's a great opportunity. Yes, there are some challenges, but it is a great opportunity, because you've got an island of Ireland with approximately 7 million people on it, which is actually a good size in relation to doing data science research, and looking at ways in which you can share that data. Both Ireland and Northern Ireland are part of something which is called the International Cancer Benchmarking Partnership, which I'm privileged to chair. And that allows us to actually look at comparing data, because you want to find out, how are you doing? Are you doing well? Are you doing not so well? Not to compete, but just to find out, well, what is it that would make it better in terms of survival or earlier diagnosis or whatever. I mean, a good example is Denmark, which was down at sort of the bottom of the league table in relation to cancer outcomes if you compared several countries in Europe and Canada and Australia. But then they realised that through the international cancer benchmarking, because they saw that the data showed that they were doing poorly, but they did something about it. They went and really prioritised cancer, and then they also prioritised primary care and looking at ways in which you could diagnose cancer earlier. So it just shows you that using data can allow you to actually make a difference and make changes. And so I think that's a great opportunity. And obviously Liam mentioned the Health Hub for Cancer that Aidan Culhane from the University of Limerick and myself co-lead. And that's a good example of working together, sharing data, looking at ways in which we can really use that data it most effectively, to understand more about the disease, but also to look at affecting change, be that policy change, be that early diagnosis, be that new therapeutic approaches.
Yeah, I suppose just to jump in there, Priscilla, I suppose, again, Mark kind of led on a very critical paper published recently in was a Lancet Oncology Commission, which was essentially the most comprehensive analysis of cancer research across Europe, which really kind of informed, provided a lot of key recommendations. And one thing, and also has done a certain amount of analysis of what's happened in terms of what we've done well on the island of Ireland. And just recently, we've gotten some funding now from the Irish Cancer Society to actually do even further deep dive, really to provide that evidence base of what we're actually good at in terms of, from a publications point of view, but also a delivery in terms of impact, in terms of care. And, if we just take one example, if you look at, for example, Cork have an amazing centre focused on the microbiome, the APC Centre, which are really punching above its weight, with some activity in the cancer research space, but could be more, for example. And you've also got strengths of different researchers around Ireland in the area of immunology. And we saw an opportunity where you could actually converge this idea of immunology and the microbiome together. So that was one of the workshops that we organised. We think there's I suppose our function is to identify complementary opportunities and bring those stakeholders and researchers together.
Very much so. And I think, Mark, you're obviously a very well-known data champion, and you've showcased really the benefits of using data even during the COVID-19 pandemic, when we looked at the changing patterns and presentation of cancer, the delays, the impact on patients of not being able to come forward to be treated and to be diagnosed. But that is something that is a large source of frustration, Professor Gallagher, obviously in the Republic, because we don't have access to the data the way we should do. We are improving, but we certainly don't have the structures that we need, and sometimes even individual units find it hard to talk to each other, not mind to try and get a picture of what's happening in real time across the country.
Yeah, like this is Mark's space, but I have more of a general comment in terms of, I suppose, in Ireland we've had a very, very strict interpretation of the I suppose health research regulations when it comes to data. And obviously, we've had challenges in terms of, obviously, the hacking issues in terms of the computer interface. I've had a variety of different kind of IT related issues, but critically important is that we need a common identifier really to actually carry out both effective patient care, but also any level of high level research. But certainly, Mark is the expert in this.
It's an interesting story, Priscilla, actually, because it actually started with a personal story. So at the very start of the pandemic, my uncle unfortunately passed away due to a COVID-related illness. And one of my colleagues, who's an oncologist in Croatia, Edward Vidoliak, was reaching out to me to sympathise with me on my loss. But he then said something that really worried me. He said in Croatia at that stage, which is just at the start of the pandemic, people were fearing a COVID diagnosis worse than a cancer diagnosis. And so we thought about that, and we said, anecdotally, we'd heard a couple of people saying that, but no real evidence. And that prompted us to do the work in relation to looking at the impact of COVID and lockdowns on cancer patients and cancer services. And what we found initially, we did it in the UK, just to summarize, 7 out of 10 people with a suspicion of cancer either weren't seeing their GP or weren't getting referred on. 4 to 10 cancer patients weren't getting their chemotherapy in time. And that led then to a European study which showed that 100 million cancer screening tests were not performed and 1 million diagnoses were probably missed. So, unfortunately, the impact of the COVID pandemic outside COVID has actually been significant and potentially more significant. I mean, that could take a decade for us to turn that around. But the reason why we were able to do it so quickly was we were able to get access to near real-time data. And so again, Priscilla definitely would agree with you that ability to access, because you want to know what's happening in the here and now, not what's happened a year ago or 6 months ago, because you can't make decisions unless you have accurate but also timely data.
Absolutely. And that is something I think researchers are pushing for more in the Republic, and especially with trying to roll out an electronic healthcare record. And then obviously, given your work, how can we get our electronic care record to speak to yours in Northern Ireland, and to make sure that you do have access to that data? Because really, that's going to be the key from so many different strands of research, whether it's into prevention, diagnosis and treatment, having access to patient data, large scale data sets, being able to do those studies and really see how you can help patients at the end of the day, because that's what it's really all about.
Yeah, no, completely. And one of the things we're looking at the moment is to try and set up secure data environments to do work between the North and the South in terms of, sharing data within a safe environment so that we can actually do those sort of comparisons between North and South, but also contribute to the international research effort as well by, participating in research studies like the International Cancer Benchmarking Partnership and other ones as well. But the key is being able to get that data in near real time and being able to use it. And the interesting thing is, if you talk to patients, they want us to use the data. In fact, they're often surprised, why isn't it being used? So, we're really sort of tying our own hands behind our back in relation to, particularly in the Republic of Ireland. And I've gone on about this in terms of why don't you get a patient record, the unique patient identifier. I mean, there is some movement forward on that, so hopefully that happens more quickly than it has to date.
And I suppose there's a slight disconnect, obviously, because obviously Ireland is well known for its, I suppose, sophisticated industry ecosystem in the area of ICT, for example, and there's huge opportunities. We've just completed a body of work funded by Intertrade Ireland and the kind of industry ecosystem analysis, really looking at asking the question, who are the companies on the island of Ireland which are carrying out activity in the oncology space, but also allied digital health. There's some really exciting range of companies out there which are, for example, leveraging the use of AI approaches for pathology or for clinical trial design or kind of care. But it would be very unfortunate if we can't use those particular technologies. They might be developed on the island of Ireland, but if we can't use them on our own island, that would be quite unfortunate. So I think we have to actually be able to be ready to, I suppose, act as a kind of test case example. But for that, we need certain issues solved, particularly in Ireland.
And that is something really that is key, is that in AICRI, not working in silos. So not only are you working north and south, you're trying to find out what else is happening that is in this sphere. How can that connect into your research? And obviously as well at a European level and at a US level is something that we're going to explore as well, that you're not just working here in isolation. You're looking at the bigger picture and what can we learn, on the wider scale.
So I suppose one thing which was great last year, so AICRI was joined in with the National Cancer Control Programme as part of a big EU grant called ECHOS. So this is essentially a large-scale programme funded under the EU Cancer Missions programme. It's a large-scale funding mechanism focused on cancer, driven by the EU. And essentially this particular programme is going to establish what are called national cancer mission hubs in each EU member state, but also an associated network. So what's a national cancer mission hub? Really, I suppose it's an AICRI-like construct. It's an organization or a loose organization that actually improves, I suppose, participation at a European level, but also better connects research with policy. There's no point in actually carrying out research that's disconnected from policy. So having that close association between what's going on the research level and what's going on the policy side. And for example, last September we had a great day actually, where essentially a day focused on who has been funded at a European level for cancer research programs or care programs, and we essentially was the EU Cancer Mission Day in the Herbert Park, and it was an amazing story where we have all of these really exciting new potential screening programs coming on stream in terms of demonstrators in prostate cancer, lung cancer, gastric cancer. They've been funded under European programs, and what's important is they're funding the demonstration of these new screening programs, but also Ireland is involved in that demonstrator, such that, for example, if they're successful, then they're the early adopters of those particular approaches. So I think the whole idea is that we want to get more involved. We need to be more organized to be involved. And that's where something like AICRI can be involved.
And obviously that's very important for Northern Ireland as well, given the implications of Brexit, Professor Lawler.
Yeah, no, one of the great things is obviously now we're back in Horizon Europe and in relation to funding, but it's not just the funding that's important, it's the actual interactions. the funding helps the interactions, obviously, but it's so one of the things we're really delighted. In fact, I've just been at a meeting earlier on today in terms of planning how we will approach some of the funding calls in Horizon Europe. And obviously, what makes perfect sense is the ideal partner is just down the road. In relation to, so one of the things we're looking at is trying to enhance more Ireland, Northern Ireland collaborations as part of bigger collaborations to look at successful funding through Horizon Europe, and particularly the Cancer Mission Programme, which obviously is the only health program that's specifically mission that's about a health condition. So we're really looking at ways in which we can drive that agenda as well.
And recently, the 10th anniversary of the European Cancer Patients Bill of Rights happened. That was launched on World Cancer Day in 2014. And that was a catalyst for change and a charter for action for those affected by cancer in Europe. And Mark, I know you've written about this, and obviously you've been involved in this. And how has that kind of, I suppose, informed your work and the work of AICRI as well?
Yeah, very much so. That's the reason I came to Belfast, actually. That was the project. It was a very specific project that Paddy Johnson asked me to work on in terms of looking at cancer inequalities. So at the time, it was the largest cancer inequalities analysis that had been performed in Europe. And really, it shocked us what we saw. And that led to us then developing the European Cancer Patient Bill of Rights. And what's been great about the Bill of Rights is it's really acted as a catalyst of change right across Europe. But it's also led to us developing a European Code of Cancer Practice with the European Cancer Organization. And that's been really important because it's essentially identified the 10 things that cancer patients should expect from their health system. So looking at not just things in relation to diagnosis, but also reintegration into society, so a whole range of different things. Research is very much an important part of that. So that's been critical because that's really gained sort of a European-wide acceptance, and cancer patients are using it in relation to asking those questions of their health system. So it's been really effective and very practical, patient orientated. But it started with a study to look at identifying the problem. So again, data is really important. It gives you the intelligence to identify what the problem is, and then informs then how you deal with that problem. But yeah, I can remember the one challenge I remember in terms of actually launching the European Cancer Patient Bill of Rights in the European Parliament. I was presuming we would be launching it in Brussels, but 1 in every 4 weeks, the European Parliament goes to Strasbourg. And I can tell you, trying to get 50 people to Strasbourg to launch something is not easy. The flights are all over the place to try and get there. So that was one of the downsides of launching in the European Parliament.
Well, one interesting thing really that's come from the charter, I think, and from what I get a sense of from a lot of the research and the press releases that I get from the European Union and the European Commission, is the increasing focus on prevention. Because when we talk about cancer research, I know it's very important about cancer trials, about treatment, but also even Professor Gallagher as well, in your research, how do we predict who gets cancer? How do we prevent that? And you mentioned there about screening programs as well. And currently we only test for a small amount of cancers, where there is that evidence base there, the strong evidence base for a screening program. But there has been increased calls, say, in particular in lung cancer. So that it's obviously an exciting time, and a focus as well that's important to AICRI about prevention, isn't that it?
Yeah, and I think the challenge with looking at cancer prevention is you need a long-term perspective. So, for example, a lot of the big prevention studies which have taken place at a European level have been driven by the Scandinavians, for example, because they have a long-term perspective. They have a lot of funding driven by large-scale foundations which allow a 20 to 30-year perspective. Now, what's interesting is that Ireland is a partner within the International Agency for Research Against Cancer, which is in Lyon. So it's and actually I was the scientific representative from Ireland for about 3 years, just up to about 2 years ago. And it's an amazing organization in terms of that IARC really, a big focus is really on this area of cancer prevention and then looking at risk factors. What's very interesting, given the focus of a meeting that just took place, we'll probably talk about later, the Euro-American Forum on Cancer, one of the focuses on lung cancer. And obviously, we know one of the big triggers for lung cancer is smoking. That's obvious. But one of the kind of key things that's come out is a refocus on the area of pollution, environmental pollution, as a driver, as a promoter of lung cancer. And that's essentially driven by work from a clinician scientist in the UK called Charles Swanton, who published a very significant paper in Nature a couple of years ago, where he looked at microparticulates in the environment as a kind of this kind of key driver, that, we have mutations all in our body, but this is really almost like an accelerant. These microparticles which are in heavy polluted cities. And so the whole area of kind of environmental impacts as drivers is very important, because often we focus on, which is important, diet, but these other external factors which we need to kind of consider at a societal level. So certainly from an AICRI point of view, yeah, cancer prevention is critically important, but we also need to have the infrastructure to carry out prevention research and also do prevention trials. And that takes a long-term committed perspective. And that's back to my original point, that you can't really fund that in a 3 to 5 year cycle. You need a 10 or 20 year kind of landscape.
That is fascinating, isn't it? Because I've heard a lot about the impact on respiratory health of pollution, but now, as you said, we're beginning to rise its longer term impact on cancer as well. But that is something that takes a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of data. But as an island, obviously Ireland is very well poised there to look at the pollution levels in Ireland and to track, the levels of cancer. That's an area that is obviously ripe for research.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, looking at ways in which we can work together with other disciplines, which is really important in terms of looking at that, public health disciplines, but also one of the things we've been interested in is developing approaches where we, bring together computer scientists, biologists, and together we have a program called Momentum 10, which is part of the Belfast Region City and Growth Deals, where we want to apply secure connected intelligence, but in the health and the agri-food space, and that's sort of one health space, if you like, because I think we're going to have to think about disease and well-being completely differently over the next 10 to 20 years. We're probably going to move away from the hospital approach to a more in the community approach. So we need to have sort of different algorithms, and that's why we're very much an open church. We welcome anybody to work with us. They don't have to be cancer researchers, because we see that there are opportunities for interdisciplinary research that will bring new solutions that we need to address complex issues like, the interplay between the environment and health, for example.
And obviously, equality of access is going to be important as well. When we're talking about the rollout of new screening programs, perhaps for lung cancer, I'm sure you both agree that it'll be very important that patients, both North and South, have access to these screening programs.
Actually, interestingly, one of the programs in lung cancer, it's the Irish participation in that is driven by Professor Jurishka Naidu and Professor Patrick Redmond out of the Royal College of Surgeons, Beaumont Hospital. And their part is to look at how do we, tackle marginalised communities or underrepresented communities in terms of those screening programs. Because again, if you're always just targeting the worried well or individuals who are a certain socioeconomic demographic, you're not really going to tackle the full issue in terms of the requirement. So that's how these EU programs can actually be useful, because you can actually find funding and demonstrate it. And that's a key part of the overall European mission, being able to get in there and actually target and identify new tailored approaches based on different communities or different groups. Like again, one of our colleagues on the AICRI side, Professor Michael Kerrin in Galway, he's quite passionate about kind of regional differences in terms of on even the island in Ireland, in terms of, I suppose, the differences in terms of access regionally to care. Because obviously, if you look at the Galway region and that whole service region, it's a huge geographic region and multiple different communities, and there's kind of a spatial kind of issue in terms of people having to physically, it takes a long time for them to go to different parts of that part of Ireland. Whereas obviously I live in Dublin, so it's easy for me to be able to get access to almost immediate access to care. And so we have these kind of spatial differences that need to be addressed, but also the changing nature of how cancer care is delivered. We obviously have this, which I think has been a good thing in terms of centralisation of cancer services. And we'll probably have further centralisation and specialisation in terms of cell therapies, but also you still have to be able to offer things to people who actually live at a different part of the island. And so that level of sophistication, it needs to be put into place.
Yeah, one of the things we did, Priscilla, recently was actually developed a European Code of Cancer Practice, particularly for rural areas, because there is that rural urban divide in relation to cancer care, and we sometimes talk about the rural deserts in relation to cancer and other diseases, but it seems to be sort of more prominent in cancer, and it's there's also sort of coastal regions as well. So that's why it's really important to look at your environment as well as so it's nature and nurture, if we go back to the old saying.
That's very interesting, because I know, looking at screening, for example, it can be brought into communities, and that is happening actually with some of the screening programs, bringing screening locally to people in their communities to encourage them to take it up. And also certain cancer services can be delivered locally. I know obviously we had a huge reconfiguration in Ireland for good reason, but there are some things such as chemotherapy that can be delivered locally, which is very beneficial to patients. But sometimes there can be a bit of a resistance to that, even though, as you've said, the way to go is trying to bring as much care into the community, uncomplicated care.
Yeah.
And that can include some cancer care.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we obviously had to do that during COVID. And we've learned from that. I mean, one of the things that I've been sort of advocating is, let's not forget the good lessons we learned from COVID in terms of things that we actually adopted and did well. And it does worry me slightly that certainly certain organisations are sort of suggesting, oh, well, we just did that because we had to, and let's now go back to what we were doing. And actually what we were doing was completely inappropriate in the modern age. And it's certainly looking at ways in which we can learn from obviously we had huge challenges, and I'm not in any way belittling that, but we also learned how to do things differently. So we shouldn't then just be going back to sort of, just because we did it that way before means it's the right way. I think we learned how to be really innovative. And the other thing I think we learned very clearly was that you cannot deliver better health without research, because we would not have got any of the COVID vaccines or anything like that except for the research that was done. And similarly in cancer, we now know, we've proved through what Liam mentioned earlier in relation to the cancer ground shot, and that people who are treated in research active hospitals have better outcomes than those who are not. So research is not a luxury, it's actually a necessary component of 21st century cancer care.
Yeah, and I suppose COVID, like, people are energized. It was a new thing. There was an impetus. But, like, the cancer burden, like 1 in 2 people will get cancer during their lifetime. Okay, it's particularly in Ireland, on the island of Ireland. So it's only going to increase. And, ultimately now on the positive side, obviously we've made huge developments in terms of diagnostics and treatments. And there's a huge increase in the number of people who have kind of gone through a cancer experience coming out the other side. But sometimes they're left with various different issues in terms of anxiety, work-related issues. I suppose one of the opportunity areas that we're kind of a bit disappointed about is that we don't have a big program that actually brings the area of cancer survivorship and quality of life issues together. And that's an area that certainly I'm passionate about trying to actually drive forward, because we've done pretty well in our neck of the woods, which is laboratory sciences, still some work to go. But that whole area, there's some very good individual programs, but there's still an opportunity and a requirement, I think, for a bigger program to bring and maximize what's going on and provide opportunities for people to really address those critical issues. I'll give you one concrete example. I have a family member who gone through a cancer experience, left with severe insomnia, and tried different things to address that. But a colleague of mine, just going to a cancer symposium, there's an ongoing trial for a sleep kind of app, I suppose cognitive behavioral therapy approach, very simple trial that you could participate in. It's not talking about a new drug. It's essentially an app that can help people sleep. But being able to sleep is probably one of the most significant things for certain people after a cancer experience when they've gone through it, and has dramatic impacts on quality of life. But it's kind of not easy. It's not easy to get that type of activity funded. It's not now. I suppose you can turn it on its head, and you can essentially say, look, you may not get a Nature paper on it, right? But you'll have a dramatic impact in terms of lifestyle, but also just opportunities from an economic impact in terms of, because you can also incentivize companies to develop these types of apps and solutions. So I think we need to kind of just think more broadly about how we think about addressing cancer and how research can be used to advance, I suppose, ensure that people live better and longer lives after their cancer diagnosis. It's as simple as that.
That's very interesting that you mentioned survivorship there, because that is a neglected area. How do we measure cancer outcomes? If we look at 5-year survival, but do we look enough at quality of life and the impact of cancer treatment on people's bodies and their quality of life afterwards? We're realizing now that sometimes that aggressive cancer treatment doesn't really lead to, a better life afterwards. So that is, again, an area that is ripe for further research. And again, it's about getting that data, though, isn't it?
It's an area that we've very much focused on, because published a paper there recently in relation to really developing a survivorship plan for Europe, because there isn't a survivorship plan for Europe in relation to cancer. And one of the things we've sort of been saying is that we really need to look at ways in which we can capture that type of data, be it psychosocial data, be it physical data in relation to the effects of treatment. Because there are 20 million cancer survivors in Europe. And certainly I don't feel that we're doing enough for those 20 million. We need to be quite innovative in terms of how we, in terms of collecting data from apps, etc. And looking at ways in which we can really deliver for those people who are surviving a cancer and living with and beyond cancer, because we're getting better at treating it. But that's the sort of side thing, is that we're then obviously going to have more people who could potentially have either physical or psychological issues. So we need to be providing that level of service. And that gets back to, sort of what we were saying earlier about, because that a lot of that would be done in the community. And the other thing is, obviously, COVID also had the impact on cancer doctors and allied healthcare professionals. I mean, one of the things we found was that 4 to 10 cancer healthcare professionals were burnt out, but more importantly, 3 out of 10 had signs of clinical depression. And so, as well as the patients, it's also the actual medical practitioner we need to look after as well.
I think you really bring it back there to, that there's such a broad scope of areas where we need to know more about in relation to cancer. And it doesn't always have to be very complicated or very expensive. It doesn't have to be about precision medicine, about genomics. It's very much, again, as you said, about how do those working in oncology, how do those patients experience oncology? How do they feel? What is the impact on their lives afterwards, whether it's from the disease or the side effects? How do those working in cancer care, how do we ensure that they have sustainability in their careers, that they don't feel burnt out, that they can really give the best to patients? So there's a lot of areas there, as you said.
What we did 2 weeks ago was in the Mansion House in London, we launched a Cancer Workforce Fund through the European Cancer Organisation, and to look at ways in which we can provide a low level of funding initially, but to seed projects to look at exactly those issues. And are there, for example, digital solutions that we can put in place that can help? Are there other ways in which we can work with cancer professionals? So very keen on looking at ways in which we can do that. And as I said, we've created a fund to do just that, and to look at trying to find tangible solutions that will actually make a difference for cancer health professionals.
And I know, Professor Gallagher, you're very involved with getting the patient voice, into what focuses that you're looking at in cancer, and how they can become more involved, even with your work with the Cancer Choir. If you can tell us about, I suppose, how you reach out to those communities. I see that you're a lot online, even across Twitter, and you're accessible. So you're not away in this big glass institution. It's very, forbidding looking. You're out there, you're reaching out to people, you want to listen to them.
Yeah, I find it very interesting because, again, I'm kind of keen to get outside the university and interact with people. And I suppose one of our most recent events happened just before, and in the lead up to the Christmas shopping. Now, normally I'm not a great shopper, so I don't like going shopping, but I was in Dundrum Town Centre and on the ground floor, and I was there as part of an exhibition that I've been working with Vincent Devine, who's a fine artist who painted a portrait of Vicky Phelan, the Triptych portrait. And so I went to the unveiling of that, and a couple of years back in Mooncoin, where Vicky was living at the time, and our parents were there, and ultimately I was struck by it in terms of its ability to convey a message, kind of tell a story. And I said, okay, I need to work with this guy in terms of conveying a message in terms of cancer research. So I interacted with him and said, look, will you start working with us with our cancer researchers in our institute, but also some patients, to tell their story, to tell the story of cancer research and tell the story of the patient story. And that kind of exploded into essentially 5 paintings. It was essentially a play on the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci. We call it the Vitruvian. It's kind of androgynous figure. And we built all of these different cancer research stories in there as a visual kind of metaphor. but also we built in patient narratives. And what was amazing was when we were displaying this and the other works, it's just random conversations you have with people. So just, as long as you say to people, we're not selling anything, okay, we were just just showing a painting. The stories, every single person I talked to had a cancer story. Every single person, everyone. So look, anyway, that's just an example of one of our more recent projects in that space.
It's a really interesting project, and it just shows really about research. People's real stories can really influence, what you focus on and what you look at and what you realize is actually important. And Mark, I suppose from your own perspective as well, you're very keen on, making research more accessible and bringing it into communities and to patients on the ground.
Yeah, no, we're really lucky in Northern Ireland. We have the Northern Ireland Cancer Research Consumer Forum. So it's a group of patients and patient advocates, but specifically focusing on research. And it's really important. One of the things we've done is very much in terms of an initiative called DataCam, which is the UK's health data research hub for cancer. Cancer patients not only are at the centre of that in theory, but absolutely very much in practice. So, for example, they were involved in the original writing of the grant that led to the development of DataCam. They're involved in the management committee, the steering group, but also they're involved in any conversation we have with partners, either academic partners or industry partners. So they're in the room, and that's what the way we want it. And so they actively participate rather than passively receive. And what's really interesting is that some of the conversations we've had, for example, with industry have come back to us and said, actually, having the patient in the room was much better because we actually ended up developing something much more patient-centered, patient-approved, and actually a better study than what we came up with at the start. So that's real co-creation, if you like. And both Liam and myself are big into that idea of, not rubber stamping or saying, oh, what patient advocates are involved in this, but real co-creation where they're working together with us hand in glove. And that's been really informative for us and humbling for us. And one of the quotes I love is from Pete Wheatstone, who's the chair of our PPIE committee. He said, not only are we empowered, but we feel empowered. That sort of made me feel, well, we must be doing something right.
That's great to hear. And I suppose moving from on the ground in the community to maybe the bigger stage, you were both part of the AICRI delegation that was in the US in March, where you met members of the US Congress on Capitol Hill in Washington, and spoke to the US Congressional Cancer Caucus and explained to them the work of AICRI and the benefits that it's brought over its 25 years.
Yeah, that was an unbelievable opportunity, and I'd like to pay tribute to, again, Kieran Briscoe. He's I think it was probably spent about 2 years working on this at so different levels in terms of engagement. And again, that US-Ireland connection is critically important. Like, one of the untold stories is what's amazing. Like, I don't know exactly, we're probably about 80 medical oncologists in Ireland, approximately. Over half of them have been trained in the top 5 cancer centers in the US. Right, there's nowhere else in the world like that. It has an enriched population of such highly trained individuals on the cancer treating side. And so we have, and also we have strong footprints of people who've gone and stayed there, like Eileen O'Reilly, who won the Burkitt Medal in Trinity there a couple of years back in Memorial Sloan Kettering. So we have these ties both on the clinical side, but also probably at a preclinical side. And so we've had obviously the tripartite program. We have various different links, and I suppose what we were trying to do with that particular interaction with Capitol Hill was obviously tell that story, but also tell that what we've been doing in terms of this cross-border story, in terms of partnership across boundaries. Cancer is a kind of neutral topic that can break down things that can go beyond political differences. And so that particular group is a bipartisan group in Congress. It's a Congressional Cancer Caucus. And again, they don't normally meet people from outside the US, you know what I mean? So it was a particularly fantastic opportunity. And the day before, we actually had Mark and myself were on a panel in an amazing venue in the United States Institute of Peace. And that was to celebrate essentially the 25 years of Intertrade Ireland, which is another cross-border body. And we were again able to talk and refer to the tripartite initiative. So I suppose what one thing that I kind of acknowledge from that is we have something to bring to the table here as well in terms of a story, and how you can actually cancer can be this topic that it's a common interest. It's not only across borders, but across religions, across different backgrounds, we can actually work together to solve these things.
Really important what Liam said, because I think the other thing that we really learned, and we've learned over the last number of years, is that we punch above our weight in Ireland and Northern Ireland. And so, for example, we have a doctoral training program with the National Cancer Institute in Washington, and we had a celebration of that last year, and we also met some of the students on that this year. But it's been so successful that the US researchers are saying to us, these guys are so good that you're sending over, these are from Queens, that we want more of them. So we've been very lucky that we're just, it isn't official yet, but we've just been awarded an all-Ireland National Cancer Institute doctoral training program grant, so that we'll be able to send researchers from different institutions on the island of Ireland to the NCI as part of their doctoral training program. And so I think it's important that it's a two-way process. It's not just the US helping us to sort of get our, self in shape. It's actually a joint partnership of equals, and they also see the benefit of it, and that the quality of the people who are coming over is, and as Liam said, the quality of people who go to the States, do their training, then come back and lead programs on the island of Ireland. And so it's a really win-win situation, but in a partnership of equals, which I think is really important.
It really is, because I know 25 years ago, you were given the bones of the project, and the US involvement was there backing it as part, obviously, of the Belfast agreement. But as you've said, 25 years on, that connectivity is still very much there, and it is an equal partnership, and you're both bringing benefits to the table. And speaking of which, then AICRI, then ye turned around and ye have hosted this amazing Euro-American Forum on Cancer in Farmley in Dublin, having really renowned speakers, and also involving ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology, and a huge array of very important researchers and clinicians. And how did that come about? And that's obviously another key achievement for the collaboration.
Yeah, I might start, and then Mark comes in. Like, this is, I think, certainly Mark's baby, and I'm helping on the wings. But again, this is driven primarily by Kieran Briscoe and Mark. And I suppose the context here is, I call it like, it's like the Davos of cancer. Really, we in one room, we want, I suppose, the top kind of researchers, but also people, broader stakeholders from America, Europe, to really talk about two key issues in the area of lung cancer and cancer inequalities over a 2-day period. So that was the context behind the meeting. And I suppose the idea is, one of the reasons why lung cancer was obviously a no-brainer, in the sense that, Ireland this year marking the 20th year anniversary since the ban on smoking in public places. And I suppose that was really the key context. And I suppose, one could argue you could have organised it in Brussels. It might have been easier for some people to organise in Brussels, but that was a kind of key argument for us. But also what we've been doing at an AICRI level, this kind of just breaking down silos, bringing people together, it fits very naturally into that context. And I suppose I'll pass it over to Mark in terms of the broader context.
Yeah, no, it was an absolutely super event. 2 days, we're absolutely wrecked now after it still. But it was just, as Liam said, it was really, we pitched for it. The obvious thing would have been just to have this in Brussels, but actually, to be fair, the organisation saw what we had done, saw the sort of partnerships that we had developed. Obviously, a number of us are involved in different European organisations and have very close affiliations with US organisations. So it actually made sense of Ireland being the bridge, if you like, between Europe and America. And they actually sort of saw that vision that we had. And again, it took us probably about a year to put this together, in terms of, because we had to pitch for it. It wasn't that they just said, oh yeah, have it in Dublin, no problem. And so we had to sort of justify why Dublin, why not Brussels, for example. But it was just, the passion in the room, the sense of something really special. As Liam, I love Liam's phrase, the Davos of cancer, because it is right. We were bringing together really the top people to discuss big issues and to come out with recommendations in relation to how we can really supercharge the sort of Euro-American partnership, because we shouldn't just be insular on a European level or a US level as well. This is, we should be looking at ways in which we can actually help in low and middle income countries, and the US and Europe have a role to play in that, and if you like, we were the broker of that conversation. So again, still recovering, but it was a wonderful event.
And just really to emphasize again the quality of the speakers that you had there. I mean, the influencers, I mean, the American Cancer Society, the European Cancer Organization, the American Society for Clinical Oncology, the US National Cancer Institute, obviously ministers, North and South, politicians from the US as well as Irish politicians. It really was a unique event, and such high level people in cancer research, in cancer policy, in cancer delivery. Such an amazing collaboration, and hopefully something that will spur further collaboration, further projects.
We're already working on how the recommendations will be implemented, and obviously it's timely as well from a European perspective, because obviously we're coming up to the European elections. One of the manifestos from the European Cancer Organization was very sort of strongly promoted in relation to that, and obviously we will have the American elections in November, so it's an important time politically as well, and you need to influence, and that's why we felt that this was really important, that we could help drive that initiative and contribute in some small way to the overall changes that we hope will happen both in Europe and in the US, but all around the world in the fight against cancer.
Yeah, and we're also, what was great, we were able to showcase a bespoke painting. I refer back to Vincent. So Vincent's been working with worked with a variety of different contributors who spoke. For example, Julie Graylow, who's the Chief Medical Officer of ASCO, major organisation. Kathy Oliver, key patient advocate, working with various different individuals, telling the story of not only AICRI, but also the US-Ireland links and Ireland-European links, all in just one painting. So that essentially was showcased at the event. So this is a truly unique kind of piece, which kind of tells the story of what we've been doing.
And both of you have really emphasized the importance of not working in silos, connecting together, collaboration. Cancer knows no boundaries. And that's not just North and South. That's working with our colleagues in Europe, working with our colleagues in America, and how fruitful that can be, and how technology and data can really help us work across those borders. And that information looks at so many different areas of cancer care and cancer prevention and survivorship. So I think a really exciting and interesting chat today. And for those who'd like to find out more, if you just look up the AICRI at the website, all that information is there, and hopefully we will hear more about your future projects. So that's AICRI.org, and I think that's all we have time for. So thank you so much, Professor Lawler and Professor Gallagher, for joining me to chat about innovation in oncology research today. Please tune in for further episodes of the Innovation in Healthcare podcast series.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe to The Medical Independent for the latest healthcare news and debate. Sign up at www.mindo.ie to stay up to date on all the latest medical news. Join the discussion on Twitter at med_Indo News. Introducing the new Medical Independent app. Why not join over 14,000 healthcare professionals and stay up to date on the latest healthcare news in Ireland? Read in-depth reports on the issues impacting the health service and medical professionals. Trusted insights, breaking news alerts, in-depth analysis, and more. Download the Medical Independent app on the Apple Store or the Google Play Store by searching the word Mindo. The Medical Independent app. Your news,